Today, we're going to be talking about solo traveling and my experience doing it, maybe your experience of doing it, and then comparing it with like the advantages and disadvantages to traveling with a group of people. So, for those of you who don't know, solo traveling is the act of traveling solo in another country or place for a predetermined amount of time, be it from a couple of days to maybe an entire year to maybe even multiple years. And so, with solo traveling, personally, I have always approached it with a certain level of anxiety because I'm the type of person that can do a lot of things by themselves, but it's much better when you share the experience with somebody or a group of people that you consider friends when you're adventuring, let's say, like in another country. When you travel, it's truly an amazing experience because you get to see new places, encounter new people, encounter new historic places. You know what I mean? It's just like you see a bunch of like new things. And typically, depending on your personality type, I am an introverted extrovert. You know, I appreciate the company of other people around me, but I also want to be alone from time to time. And when you're kind of like that, I feel as if solo traveling could or could not be for you. So we covered the definition of what solo traveling is, and I'll talk about my personal experience as well when it comes to solo traveling. So I came back from a solo excursion or solo trip to Philadelphia last weekend. You probably saw some shorts on my YouTube channel about, a trip to Philly via the Amtrak, and I've checked out the Penn Museum and all these awesome places. So it was basically a 2 to 3 day weekend trip to Philadelphia, and I was alone for the whole thing, which gave me a certain level of anxiety because I had never been to Philadelphia before. I was planning it out, very last minute. I just needed a trip to like get out of the DC area. And I was like, should I like try to like, rustle up some friends to come with me? And at the end of the day, I was just like, you know what? Some things in life you just have to do alone. And I realized that as I grow older, it's very hard to coordinate, people's lives and schedules. Everyone's busy. Some people have kids. Some people have families. Some people just don't want to do anything. And other people just don't want to do the same things you do, which is all fine. So at the end of the day, it was much easier to plan it by myself. And I'm going to be like, okay, I'm going to hit the Penn Museum on day one. I'm going to do the Philadelphia Museum of Art on day two, etc., etc. So in my case, for the Philadelphia trip that I did last weekend, it was a solo trip for all intents and purposes. I interacted with very fascinating people on like the Amtrak, families that were also kind of doing the same thing, um, people that were wandering around the historic places I was visiting, just curious and asking questions. Very fascinating. And the solo travel experience came with its own baggage. So let me explain. So in terms of the advantages for solo traveling, I had my own predetermined itinerary of like what I wanted to hit in terms of like sites to visit, food to try, etc. And so I was able to do that with a greater amount of flexibility compared to if I was like with a group instead. And so I was able to do what I wanted. I ran out of time because I just, I went down streets aimlessly in Philadelphia just trying to get a vibe of the city. Very fascinating time. And so one of the advantages of solo travel is you can do when you want to, what you want to. You know what I mean? Like you have your own schedule. Sometimes you can take a detour if you want to, etc., etc. And so you don't really have to deal with, let's say, finding a consensus in a group of people that want to do one thing over the other. You know what I mean? It's like, it's very different. So when I was doing all of these different things and like just kind of exploring all these different places, the con of solo traveling was that you get lonely. And it's fascinating because it's like you get lonely without being lonely. And that's an oxymoron. So what I mean by that is like, that feeling that you get when you're eating at a restaurant or you're drinking at a bar and you kind of have like a view of the outside and you're like watching people just pass by? That's kind of like what it was like for me when I was doing my weekend trip to Philadelphia, and I was seeing all these like families together, these school trip outings, couples, etc., etc. I was just kind of watching life kind of go by, and it made me feel lonely on the inside because from what I could tell, I was the only person that was like, doing stuff on their own. Didn't really see like anyone else kind of doing that although I could have been completely wrong because I was like going from place to place to place like in a rapid manner. So the con is that you're going to feel lonely without feeling lonely. And you'll see so many people out there doing their own thing, being with their own families, and if you're alone and you're doing your, your schedule or whatever, and you see that, like you'll get lonely because you observe other people and you're like, well, why am I doing this alone? Like I could have done this with a friend, I could have done this with my significant other, if you have one, I don't. And it just makes you feel alone. That's the best way that I can describe it. But at the same time, you're surrounded by people, so in a sense, you're not lonely because you're surrounded by people. So it's like you feel alone without feeling lonely. It's a weird oxymoron, and it's a phrase that I heard from another travel influencer person that I follow on like YouTube or Instagram or whatever, and it really resonated with me because it's like you feel alone without feeling lonely. You know what I mean? And this was just a weekend trip to Philadelphia via the Amtrak, like 2 hours up the road. Like, it's funny, I had a conversation with somebody about this, and I was like, does this count as like a solo trip? Like, what constitutes a solo trip? And she was like, well, if you leave the area that you're currently inhabiting and you go to a place by yourself that you've never been to before, that's a solo trip. And I was like, really? Like you're in Iraq. I think she's in Iraq right now at the time. She travels a lot for work and stuff like that. And I was like, you're doing international trips. I'm just doing like a trip up the road. Like, does that really even count? And she was like, well, yeah, if you're doing it by yourself, it doesn't matter what the distance is or the time it takes to get there. It doesn't matter. It's still a solo trip and it's a start. Obviously you have different like hierarchies of scale when it comes to like traveling. Like, international travel is something that, I want to get back into, and I'm hypothetically doing that in May when I go back to see some family in Cambodia. That's going to be a bunch of travel footage as well, by the way. I'm super excited for that. But that's not solo travel. It's like I'm linking up with family. I'm going to be spending some time with my folks, so it's very different. And I'm not going to be doing any touristy stuff, unfortunately, because it's just I need to spend more time with family. So with solo travel, it's like the advantages include like having a very flexible schedule that you can do what you want. You don't have to, nag people to like try to convince them to go somewhere if you don't want to, and you can basically go home whenever you want to. I mean, those all three sound the same, I know that, but like those are very real advantages that I found when I was solo traveling myself. And then the cons, excuse me, the cons also include like, you feel alone, but you're not lonely because you're in a new place, you're by yourself, you're doing all these new things, but you see all these people around you and you feel lonely as heck sometimes because you kind of like, I'll give you an example. Like on Saturday night, right? I was at a place called Chaya Tea Thai restaurant. It was a vegan Thai restaurant that was very delicious. The decor was great. The overall dining experience was awesome. I made a post about it as well, or at least a short for the YouTube channel. And I was eating dinner, and there wasn't a lot of people at the restaurant, right? And I was eating, and I was watching people just kind of walk by me. And I got sad because I was just kind of sitting there and I was thinking about how other people perceived me eating at, a random restaurant just trying to grab dinner in Philly or whatever. And that kind of made me a little bit sad because I was just like, well, I'm all alone. I'm just eating, you know what I mean? And I don't know, I just didn't have anyone with me, so I guess that kind of looked a little bit sad. But at the same time, it was kind of an enriching experience because I was like, well, you're not going to do everything in life like with somebody, right? And there's going to be a lot of times in your life where you do something solo. Otherwise, you'll never do anything. You can't rely on other people to do new things all the time. You have to rely on yourself. So I think like that part of solo travel goes back to being very comfortable with yourself and having the courage to do stuff like that. You know what I mean? So that's definitely like a con of solo travel, is like being alone without being lonely or whatever. And then I don't know, some other cons of solo travel could be like you don't make as many like friends as you think. Also, like I consider myself a person that can like talk to people, very easily. But unless you're like in a hostel setting or you're staying with, I don't know, it's like a co-working space or whatever it is. It's like you're not going to make friends if you don't put yourself in environments that necessitate that. You know what I mean? It's like I was staying at a hotel and I didn't really meet anyone, because I was just like kind of in a room by myself. So it's like there are apps out there from what I've seen. Like I follow one on Instagram called Trip BFF, and it's very cool because like you can link up with people if they want to go to like a place or a city or a state, it doesn't matter. And that way you can find people to do solo trips with without being alone. Now, the whole kind of like, security and safe aspect of it, I'm not exactly sure about that. Haven't really like messed around with that yet. But, take precautions, obviously, like don't go to somebody's house or Airbnb. Be smart about it, you know what I mean? Meet in a public setting, that type of thing. Y'all are adults, you know this. But there are ways to kind of circumvent the loneliness through like, Trip BFF, which is one app. There's also a dozen other apps out there where you can like find solo travelers and like link up, which is pretty cool. There are hostel networks, which are pretty cool in like different places around the world. There's this pretty cool organization called Selena, which is a co-working organization that has like places like all around the world. I think you can like book accommodations as well, and you can stay there for 3 to 6 months. They've got a good Wi-Fi connection, so you can do work, but you also are surrounded by people who are in the same boat. That's a common thing for like digital nomads or just people that are traveling and just need a place to work. You know what I mean? So there's that as well with Selena, and there are ways to circumvent the loneliness, and I think I'm gonna keep that in mind the next time I do like a solo trip. But sometimes, honestly, you just wanna go out there and just explore no matter what, and that's what I ended up doing for the Philadelphia trip. So that's the whole solo travel experience for me, if you even want to register that as a solo travel thing. It was a 2-hour Amtrak ride. I made a short about that too, which is pretty cool, like just up there and back. And it was a very educational experience. I saw a lot of different things. I'm also gonna make a travel vlog about it, so keep tuned for that. That'll probably come out like maybe next Monday or Wednesday. I have to put together the footage and make it look good. I have no idea how on earth I'm gonna do that because that's my first travel vlog. So apologies in advance if it's pretty amateurish, but it's fun. You know what I mean? And so if you're considering solo traveling, I would say do it. Like solo traveling you'll learn a lot of things about yourself that you would never think otherwise. Like for example, for me, I consider myself to be, a very outgoing person, but I also have a tendency to kind of retreat inside if I'm like kind of shy and I don't really know anybody, you know what I mean? So it's just like being like plucked from the DC area, which I consider to know like well at this point, and then being put in like, a new environment, which is like Philadelphia, that completely changed everything, so you have to adapt and you have to learn and you have to, learn to use the public transportation system and all that cool stuff. So if you're considering doing a solo travel trip, regardless of whether or not it's domestic or international, I would say go for it. Because like you can meet people on the road. You can also meet people through like Trip BFF. I'll link it in the description below. And then also Selena, if you're a digital nomad and you want to like go to a different place and work for 3 to 6 months or whatever with a visa and you need to be surrounded by people, I'll link that also in the description below. Like if you're considering doing a solo travel trip, do it, honestly, because like you learn so much about yourself, and also at the same time, you need to travel. Like I firmly believe that's what life is all about, is experiences, traveling, learning to see the world from different perspectives. That's what life is about, not being chained to a damn desk for the rest of your life, slaving away for like a corporation that doesn't even care for you. I mean, we're going into a different territory with that, but that's what life is about. You know what I mean? Like traveling and just seeing different places, experiencing different things, all that great stuff. You know what I mean? So if you're thinking about doing a solo travel trip, do it. And we'll end the video on that note. Like and subscribe for more, because apparently if I say that, y'all are actually gonna do it. And I'll see you around.